You too.
All right, everyone, we are doing our mindful macros method call, but our community call this month. And I thought it would be timely for it to be before the holidays because a lot of times during the holidays, we are presented with foods that we aren't normally presented with. And with those foods come a lot of, I don't like to use the word temptation, but a lot of maybe impulses, or we really like those foods. They come with a lot of emotional attachment, and we can find ourselves very easily spiraling into maybe habits that aren't serving our current goals. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and we'll get started, but it's going to be on mindful eating today.
Hey, Sarah.
Next time I do this, I get to quit.
I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Is that
It
better?
stopped a while ago. Yeah, it stopped a while ago. So I don't know if you want to start over.
Well, I'm so glad you're here so I didn't go through the whole call on mute. Okay. So, I'm talking about the mindful piece of the mindful macros method. So, those of you that are in this program, you know that it's what I called it. I called it that for a very specific reason. And the reason we're talking about the mindful piece is because we're going into the holidays. Halloween is next week. We have candy, then we have Thanksgiving, then we have Christmas. And with that are a lot of foods that we don't normally eat that probably have a lot of like emotional meaning to them, and we really like them and they're highly palatable. And so sometimes we need to be a little more mindful as we approach food during the holidays. So my goal for this is for you to take what applies to you, leave the rest, right? I never want you to feel overwhelmed with information, but take what applies to you and bring them to me in your check-ins if you find something that you really want us to address, because as with all coaching, it is very individualized and I want to know specifically what I can support you with. But I'm going to get into my story and why I called it mindful macros to begin with and why we're talking about the mindful piece today. But my goal with all of these community calls is for us to get a chance to come together. And I understand that, especially as we're in the school year, evenings are hard with kids' activities and bedtime, but also during the day is hard because many of us work or have kids or homeschool or whatever. And so there's really never a time that works for everybody. So, because we don't have a big group tonight to share wins and challenges, if you are listening to this, I want you to head over to Slack and I want you to drop a win. We always do that on Wednesdays, but also a challenge. Like, it's important to be real. Like, this is a struggle that I'm working on currently. Here's what I've tried so far, and throw that out there. And other people maybe have gone through it and maybe have some tangible advice for you as well. So please always share wins and challenges with the community, with me, of course, as your coach, but with the other community members as well. All right. So, my challenge for you today, if you're listening right now, is to head over to Slack and share that. All right, so I'm going to share a little bit my story with macros. And maybe if you have been following along since I launched my coaching in February, you might have heard some of the story. But I've always been a very active person. I was in cross country and track in high school. As with anyone, I'm sure that, not I'm sure, like I know that I didn't always feel confident in my body, and of course would love to, want to be even leaner and everything. But I generally had a healthy relationship with food, and I genuinely exercised because it made me feel good. All right. I didn't really have disordered eating tendencies that I noticed at the time. Um, at times, I'm realizing now that some of the issues that I dealt with after this point in time that I'm going to tell you about probably were patterns that were present before, such as overeating, not really binge eating, but overeating at certain times. But I was okay with it. I moved on. It was never an issue that really affected my life. But in the fall of 2017, I started a new gym, which I absolutely adored. I loved it. But with that, I also was introduced to counting and tracking macros. And I'd counted calories before after my kids, and I was able to do that with a very healthy mindset. But I think my perfectionistic tendencies came out because I was wanting to really prove myself in the gym at that point, and I wanted to like look the part and be as lean as possible. And my starting macros were probably set too low for my activity level. And I found myself really sticking to it for a long time and seeing results. But then out of the blue, I had this binging episode and I didn't really know where it came from. And I started like doing burpees around the house to try to make up for it. And this again, fall of 2017, this started my unhealthy relationship with food. And then either over exercise as a way to compensate, which I did for several years. Like I would go out and run 10 miles if I had binged the night before or do something like that. Or I would try to really restrict and try to eat very minimally in the days that followed. And so this was a really disordered relationship with food, possibly even an eating disorder that I was working through, right? But the reason I bring this up is because when I was introduced only to the macros, that was my game plan. And when this other stuff started happening, this other behavior and overeating, and I couldn't follow it to a T, I thought there was something wrong with me. Right. And so as I've grown, I won't get into all that right now, but as I've grown and overcome this, and yes, I still have overeating episodes because the goal is to always be getting better, but not always feeling like you're a failure if you do have these patterns continue at some point to a lesser extent, because I'm growing, as many of you are. But where was I going with that? So it started with the macros. What I didn't realize was that individual struggles and mindsets and everything else comes into play too anytime you're trying to stick to especially an eating program, right? And so when I started my coaching, I wanted the tangible, the macros. I want you to know how much protein to get in and why carbs are important and why fat is important. But I don't want you to just get hung up on following the program to the T. I also want that mindfulness piece. How do you feel around food? What do you fully enjoy it? Are you present with it? And so I wanted to meld those two pieces when I started my coaching. So today we're not talking about the macros piece. I generally talk about this more in coaching and check-ins, but today I want to talk about the mindfulness piece. Okay, so that's a little backstory. So again, heading into the holidays, I think this is really important too. And at the end, we might be talking, or we will be talking about a little challenge that I think I'm going to open up to my free Facebook community as well. But if it's something that you guys want to take part in, I feel like this would be a really good time to do it. But some benefits of mindful eating would be improved digestion, reduce stress. Okay. We've all been at the point where we don't know what to eat and we get so stressed out because am I eating the right stuff? Did I overeat? Am I eating too much? And it's a stressful experience. We don't want that. Okay. So we want reduced stress when it comes to eating and also a stronger connection to your body's needs. Okay. Macros on paper are good, but that's not connecting to you truly to your body. So there's 7 tips that we're going to talk about tonight. The first one, when we're eating, and all of these, I'm going to say look at it on a continuum. So you're not going to go from, man, I'm not good at this to all of a sudden I do this perfectly every time, but these are things to be aware of. So number 1 is creating a distraction-free environment. So how many times do you sit down either in front of the television and eat, or for me, I work at home. Sometimes I sit in front of my computer and I eat, or I'm scrolling on Instagram while I'm eating. But when you're distracted like that and you're not fully present with your food, sometimes that causes you to not be aware of your body signals and fullness cues and all of that. So distraction free, just sit with just your food, or if you're having family dinner with people, be present with people, be present with your food. And that calm setting is going to help you focus more on your food and your body signals. Okay. So set that up when you eat all the time. Try to have that standard. Okay. Tip number 2 is to engage your senses. So we've all heard the phrase food is fuel. And while that is true, I believe that food is also meant to be enjoyable and pleasurable. And we can enjoy it not only with our taste buds, but with all of our senses. And so when you sit down and you have the food on your plate, maybe you plated it to look beautiful. Maybe that's not in your skill set, but you can still appreciate what it looks like, what it smells like, maybe as you're chewing it, what the texture is, but savor all of it. Savor all the flavors. Notice it as you're eating, and you'll find that you have a deeper connection. And this will actually make your meal more satisfying than if you just scarf it down unaware. Okay. So the goal is more satisfaction, because if you're more satisfied, you don't feel that constant need to keep going and going and going with the food, right? So this is number 2. Number 3 is to chew slowly and thoroughly. And while I did put up there aiming for at least 20 to 30 chews per mouthful, that does seem a little bit excessive, okay? But maybe start with, how do you normally eat? And if it's normally like 4 chews and then you swallow it, maybe go up to 10 chews and chew it, move it around in your mouth a little bit, slowly, thoughtfully before you swallow it. This is better for digestion. It helps to reduce that bloating. And again, going back with the previous step, allows you to savor the texture of your food and the taste, and you'll feel more satisfied. More satisfaction leads to less overeating. Okay, this is a big one. I think this is number 4. Yeah, number 4. Practice gratitude and appreciation. And gratitude is something that we've talked about on calls of ours before. And actually, our sermon on Sunday, I go to Eagle Brook. If you guys are from Minnesota, maybe some of you are familiar with that church with multiple campuses. But he talked a little bit briefly about gratitude and how that truly does have an impact on our mindset and our brain, and we can bring that into the food space. So if you're someone that says a blessing, says a prayer, gives thanks before your meals, do that. If that is not, if that faith tradition is not part of your life, even just sitting down and just recognizing, wow, I'm grateful that I have this food right now, and practicing that gratitude with your meal, helps you be more present with it. And again, the goal is to lead to that satisfaction, right? All right. Tip number 5 is listening to your body signals. And sometimes you may have heard this said as well, is that our brain sometimes needs time to catch up to the actions of our hand feeding our mouth. And so pay attention to your hunger and fullness cues. So let's start with hunger. Okay. Pay attention to when you have the urge to eat. And this is really important, because sometimes we eat out of, for me, for example, out of boredom. I have found, this is again personal to me, and maybe some of you are this way too. I have found that I have an urge to eat, and I even sometimes trick myself into thinking I'm physically hungry when there's a task that I've been putting off. I procrastinate. All right. So that's something that I'm aware of. Okay. But if you're talking about physical hunger, it's usually something that comes on gradually. It's usually something that isn't necessarily only satisfied by this highly palatable food, but rather something that would be satisfied by things that have a lot of fiber or protein. Like, you're not necessarily craving one thing in particular, but you really have that hunger cue for any food, really. So that's number 1. Fullness, again, on the other side, is setting down your fork in between bites and after you chew, and think about, okay, am I satisfied? Am I not? And using that, okay? And I want to talk about this too, because sometimes when, again, we get so caught up on maybe the macros, and Sarah said I should be eating 20 grams of protein for my snack, but I'm just not hungry. Here's the deal. Depending on your specific goals, that will depend on how to act in the situation. But I would almost always, unless you are very drastically under eating, I would almost always encourage you to stop eating if you find yourself satisfied and full, even if you didn't eat the full 20 grams of protein, maybe you only ate 18 grams of protein. If you're satisfied and full, honor that. Okay. And if this is an individual basis and you want to talk to me about it, please bring it to me. But I know I have had that conversation with some of you. What I have found though is sometimes if you stop when you're just barely satisfied, you will find yourself being more hungry later, which then sometimes can lead to overeating later. So again, there's some nuance there, right? But honor your body's hunger and fullness cues. If we get so hung up on the numbers, we're not always aware of what those cues are. We're just going by what the app says or the paper says, and that can get tricky. That's where it got tricky for me. Okay. So that's number 5. Number 6, set regular eating patterns. This is another thing when it comes to macros. Sometimes I have found myself in the habit of trying to play macro Tetris throughout the day. So I have maybe a smaller breakfast, maybe like 300 calories, and then I go by the kitchen and I graze a little bit, but I enter it in my phone, so it's fine. I graze a little bit more, I still enter it in my phone, but then you're not getting on this regular schedule. So what I found is helpful for a lot of people, including me, is to have a breakfast schedule, have a lunch schedule, have a dinner schedule. And if you want to schedule in snacks there too, that's great. But don't get into the habit of constantly grazing throughout the day, because then your body again gets out of whack with what those actual hunger signals are. Okay. So set down those times and plan those snacks in between. Have that structure. And this is really good too. Make deliberate choices about what you eat. And we've talked about this a lot too with many of you, is you don't necessarily have to plan to a T every single thing you're going to eat for the entire day and do this really extensive meal planning. But when I talk about planning or prepping, what I mean is have things that you can pull out that are going to support your nutritional goals that don't take forever to make. So I've talked to some of you about having pre-cooked but frozen chicken breasts that you can pull out and put in the air fryer and toss with like maybe a packet of like Uncle Ben's brown rice or some veggies or fruit, but have stuff that you can grab, especially we all live busy lives, that isn't going to take forever. So you're not just grabbing for, the quick fix in the cupboard, right? Be deliberate. And then the last one, reflect on your meal experience. And this can go again before and after your meals. So for some of you that maybe have kind of lost contact with those hunger and fullness cues and you're not really sure, and am I satisfied? Am I still hungry? I don't know. I kind of feel guilty after I eat. This is really important. So have a journal. Maybe it is your phone, even though we're trying to avoid being on electronics during eating, right? But either a journal or a note on your phone. Reflect a little bit, maybe how you're feeling before your meal, jot it down, get those thoughts out of your head, and then also how you're feeling after you ate. Were you overly stuffed? Did you feel some guilt surrounding what you ate? So record it, because those emotions and thoughts that go along with your meal experience are also very important, okay? And we talked about this with many of you that have been part of my coaching for 6-7 months or so, but be your own science experiment. Nobody else can tell you exactly how to eat. It is so individualized, and as your coach, I can guide you to make those choices, but acknowledge your own feelings and thoughts surrounding it and get insight, be your own science experiment into your eating habits. Okay, so with that being said, moving forward, I think we're going to start this next week. So starting on a Monday, so that would be October 30th. But doing a 30-day mindful eating challenge. So it's not going to be overwhelming, but it's just one little thing that's on this checklist that you can check off as the days go on that will hopefully get you in the habit of being more mindful with your food. All right. So that's what I've got for you today. So the macros are great. The path is great, but you've got to bring that mindfulness into it as well. And what is your relationship with food actually like? All right, so that's my goal for this challenge that we're going to do for 30 days starting on Monday. Remember, if you are listening to this Wednesday, we did a bingo, recovery bingo. So make sure that you guys are crossing those off. Share your wins in Slack on Win Wednesday. And I hope you guys are having a beautiful October, last week of October. And as always, if any of these things hit a chord, bring it to me. Let's chat about it. But I'm just so proud of y'all. Great job.